Okay, welcome to this panel presentation of the Michael J. Mungo Undergraduate Teaching Award winners from 2010. I'm Jed Lyons, the Director of the Center for Teaching Excellence, and I'm very happy to have you here today. We have Bobby Donelson, Kim Simmons, Donna Chen, and Kevin Elliott, and I'll let each of them tell you a little about themselves because they're the reason we're here, not me. The format for today's panel is that I will ask a question that I'm going to ask them all to try to respond to, and then we're going to open it up for you to field some questions. I have a few prepared just in case y'all freeze or anything, but this is really an opportunity for you to interact with some of the best teachers on campus. Okay, so the first question is, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? I forgot. We'll start with Bobby.
I'm Bobby Donelson. I'm an associate professor of history and the faculty principal of Preston Residential College. This is my 10th year teaching at the university. I teach in areas of American and intellectual history. I have taught courses, the large 480 U.S. History Survey course, seminars in research methods, courses in religious studies, African American studies, and Southern studies.
Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Simmons, and I'm associate professor, great to say that now after last year, of anthropology and African American studies. And I have taught large intro to culture anthropology courses, some of the smaller courses in anthropology on topics of identity, African American culture, and I've also taught courses in Latin American studies and also women's and gender studies.
I'm Donna Chen in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I've been here since 1999. I'm an associate professor, and I've taught a variety of different courses. I've taught the introductory general chemistry courses to class sizes of 250. I've taught my graduate course to sizes between 5 and 15. But my real passion is teaching undergraduate physical chemistry, which is for junior and senior chemistry majors, and the size of the class is somewhere between 40 and 60.
And I'm Kevin Elliott, and I'm in the Department of Philosophy. This is my 5th year here at the university. I'm also a new associate professor, which is very nice. I teach a range of courses related to ethics of science and technology, environmental ethics. I've had a lot of fun with a course on ethical issues related to food that has about 75 students in it. I've also taught some logic courses of around 100 to 150 students as well.
Since the title of the seminar is Engaging Students, I was wondering if each of you could tell us 1 or 2 strategies that you use to engage your students. Anybody that wants to go first can start it.
Okay, I guess I'll go.
That would be fine. Thank you, Donna.
Okay, so when I teach undergraduate physical chemistry, this is considered, I think, probably one of the more difficult courses in the chemistry department. It is historically unpopular. So, what's really important, I think, is getting students involved. And what I've done there is I have like a separate recitation class, which is just for problem solving. And so we have the lecture where we go over theory and such. But in the problem solving class, I give them ahead of time some problems to look at. And we basically get together and discuss the solutions to the problems. I have students go up to the board and solve the problems. They work together in groups and report their findings. And so I think that for my class anyway, has been a great way to get the kids engaged.
Okay. As Jed suggested that he was going to ask this question, I had a couple thoughts that I thought I might share. One is very basic. A sort of necessary condition for, I think, keeping students engaged is for them to be awake and not sort of drifting off into space. And so, I mean, actually, I put a lot of attention into just purposely moving around the room as I'm talking, waving my arms, looking as sort of, as interesting as possible, writing things up on the board, sort of noticing, have I been too still or too allowing them to kind of drift off? So just very simple things like that I find in a lot of my lecturing is helpful. And then the other thing I try to do is to kind of be as reflexive as possible in thinking about sort of how would my students be perceiving this material that I'm trying to present. So thinking about, how could they connect this up with things that they're familiar with or that they care about? Is this the sort of thing that they're not going to be likely to think is very relevant to their lives? And is there any way to somehow provide an example or to get them to think about the relevance? Or even just as simple as, say, in a logic class, acknowledging if something may seem kind of boring to them and saying, look, this may not be the most exciting thing, but hang in there, it gets better, you know. So just sort of trying to see it from their perspective, I think, is sometimes helpful.
My approach is very similar to Kevin's approach. I've tried different things in my large classes and smaller classes. For example, in my large Intro to Cultural Anthropology, there are about 230 students in there. And so much like you, I walk around. And if it's a PowerPoint, one of my TAs may advance it. Sometimes that doesn't work, you know, the remote doesn't work as well, but she advances it. And I tried something last year that works really well. Let them know that I have these soft, like squishy balls, you know, with Dora the Explorer on there. And so the first day of class, I would just say, heads up. I toss the ball out there, you know. And so I had about 6 or 7 volunteers that day to come up and just do some simple role plays. So I let them know that they have to be on their toes and ready, not to embarrass them in any way, but just to keep them involved and engaged. And in some of my smaller classes, we try, you know, small group discussions, much like we all do, you know, and I try to have them think about their lived experience and connect their experiences rooted in history and culture, et cetera, and bring that to the table as part of what we're doing in the course as well.
As I said, I periodically teach what is called History 112, which is our introduction to American history post-Civil War. And the last time I taught it at about 480 students in the large BA auditorium. And I asked on the first day, how many of you enjoy history? Maybe 10 hands went up. For how many of you enjoy social studies? A few hands went up. So I realized this was a steep hill to climb in this class. Many were taking it because it was a course required to fulfill general education expectations. And so I knew from day one that my job was to bring history alive. Many thought it was a dead, boring, so what topic. And so my job was to explain why history and reflecting on the past was so important to contemporary society. And so I began to sort of dust off my old skills as an actor. I went to performing arts high school, and every day was dress rehearsal for Bobby Donelson. And every day my job was to take the flat, sort of dead words on the paper and to bring them to life for students, and to recognize in this large course that no one could hide. Dr. Simmons is right. To work a room is crucial in these large classes. The person on the back row is as important and as visible as the person on the front row. So treating my courses as a Baptist congregation for me was very important. I believed in call and response, and students knew from day one that I was very interested and curious, not about sort of what you read, but sort of your interpretation of what you read. Very clear that I was very in tune to what they thought about a topic, as much as I was about what they ultimately would write about a topic.
Great, thank you. Does anybody in the audience have a question? Or what? I know you do. So who wants to ask their question? Yes.
Form, so you've got to try to show them that there's actually a depth to the material that they perhaps never realized. So it's a pretty tough thing to do.
I think that's important. I am not going to sit here and indict high school history teachers. However, there is a real challenge that so many of our students are taught from a textbook, and they are measured by the degree to which they master a textbook. And frankly, that is incredibly boring. I think there is a great value for a textbook, and I use one in my classes. That's not unlike textbooks assigned in high school. But I also have a companion primary documents collection. I also explain to students on day one that this is a history course and each one of you is a historian. And part of your job is to interpret, to place things in context, to engage in the debate with the text, with your professor, to recognize that as smart as I am in my chosen field, that ultimately, with some mastery of the material, you too have a great deal to offer. And that is indeed a real challenge. Students are shocked that I actually care about what they think. And I think the first step in any course is to convince our young students that they are scholars in the making. And we know in all of our classes that we have students of multiple skill sets and backgrounds. And I think the challenge of any great teacher is to pitch a course or a topic to multiple levels. And that makes our jobs quite exciting every day, because we know our students have various backgrounds that they bring to the classroom. And it all depends really upon courses that are the large survey courses and more specialized courses, because many of those specialized courses are among the converted in a chosen discipline. And you then tailor a course to meet their needs and expectations.
I just wanted to second a nice point that I thought Bobby made, noting right at the beginning the way his students are already kind of historians, or, in that kind of mode, because I think like a discipline like philosophy, often the students, come in not even knowing what it is and, thinking it's really kind of weird. And I think it's sometimes helpful to point out ways in which, look, if they enjoy talking about politics or talking about religion or things like that, they've already been doing some philosophical kinds of thinking, and again, connecting up with the experiences they already have and bringing them along. So I think that's a really nice point.
So, go ahead.
Well, a question on managing some of these larger classes. So with a smaller class, you can kind of keep track of people, and if you see someone really struggling, you can identify them and you can start working with them. But with the larger classes, it seems so overwhelming. How do you handle those kinds of questions? The students that you see are struggling, but where the numbers are so large, how do you keep them or draw them in?
Strategy specifically for the larger classes.
I think I should first offer a confession. And I think this is probably true for new professors and veteran professors. I don't recall, well, there were occasions when I was working toward my PhD where we had a few workshops on teaching. But I was as green could be on day one in the classroom when it came to these large classes. And whatever success I have now was mastered over time. So on day one, when I first started teaching, this question was very pressing, because I knew history. I knew American history and African American history, I knew it quite well. But I had no clue how to teach it, and no clue how to teach it to students of multiple backgrounds. And I think if there's one thing that's really great about this occasion, this gathering, and what the Center for Teaching Excellence is doing, is that it's creating platforms and venues where we can talk about what we should all be doing well, which is teaching undergraduates, and addressing these particular types of questions. I think one of the things that's really critical in these large classes is having very talented, very skilled graduate assistants helping with that, and developing from day one an orientation program that provides our graduate students really the kind of tools they need in the classroom to assist the assigned professor and instructor. I think also for large classes, we all prepare intensely for our lecture or our chosen field. And I think sometimes we become almost fixed or fixated on the subject matter. And if anything, we should be far more attentive to the faces, the posture, the body language of students in the classroom. And I think you almost immediately begin to pick up on those students who are focused on you, who are with you at that moment, and those students who have already drifted away. And as you see that, you take note and then follow through and recognize that our job as teaching is not over after the first 50 minutes, but extends well beyond that. And also to let students know that you sincerely care about their academic success. And again, the students are really surprised by that revelation. And I think it's our job to convince them that indeed we do care about their success. That means take advantage of office hours. That means take advantage of recitation and recitation hours. And I think to kind of reel those students who are not easily convinced that professors really have a genuine interest in their success on campus.
If I could just piggyback on that, you know, on the point of caring, that's something in all honesty that I tell students each semester, that point blank, I care about you and your time here at USC, you as a person, you as a student, and I like to see you do well. And so if it's, you know, office hours, if it's taking interest in what they're doing, if it's asking them how they're doing, if it's out here, you know, walking around campus, you know, just take a couple of minutes if I see students and just talk to them. And so I think that really opens things up and lets them know that I am approachable, that I am available, those kinds of things. But returning to the question, you know, of the courses, I work closely with that large 102, the Anthro 102 course, the Intro to Cultural Anthropology course. I have 3 TAs in there. And so I meet with them once, maybe twice a week, and we talk about, you know, those same issues. We talk about some of the students in sections and making sure the students are attending sections, and they don't see it as an optional kind of activity, that it's the 3rd hour of that, you know, credit. So students need to be attending those sections. So I work closely with the TAs, but I also see that the students also oftentimes approach me first. So I'm trying to work with the student and keep the TA in the link. So sometimes it's, you know, you're managing both of those at the same time, and it can be challenging, but I'm trying to work through all that and keep my eyes, you know, and ears open.
So if, if I might continue the conversation, I think the question that you've asked for me has been the biggest challenge. Because, you know, I've been teaching classes of all different sizes, and it's the biggest challenge to be able to reach the ones in which you're teaching 150 and 250 students. And, you know, as my colleagues are saying, having a good TA is absolutely key. So in the chemistry department, everybody has a laboratory TA. And so I'll basically get together with my laboratory TAs once a week and say, how are your students doing? Who are the students who are coming? Who are the students who are struggling? You know, once I've identified some students who might need some help, I'll actually go out of my way to try to find them. Maybe after an exam, I'll try to see which person they are when they sign in and try to make some kind of connection to them. The other thing that I found works really well is when I have study sessions, and they're most heavily attended right before the exam, because then you get sort of like a smaller subset of students. Sometimes I'll have multiple study sessions, so we'll break up into groups of maybe, you know, 50, 60, and then I can get a really good interaction with the students because they're not afraid to ask all kinds of questions. But, you know, like I said, it's a real challenge to be able to try to connect to the students in any way that you can. A lot of times I'll look down at homework grades, see how people are doing. Maybe I'll send them off an email asking them to come talk to me. And so any kind of thing that you can do like that is quite helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great question, George, because I don't think I've got it all figured out how to operate with these big classes. I think a lot of the points that have been made are really good. I really like the point about sort of being approachable so that, you know, and emphasizing the fact that you'd be happy to meet with students. I think that's a really good point. You know, I think, so in the bigger logic classes that I've done, you know, it would be a large lecture on Monday and Wednesday, and then a smaller, you know, meeting with the, you know, TA on Friday. And so, you know, having attendance mandatory on the Friday, you know, then sort of helps to ensure, for the most part, that they do at least see that TA. And I'm less sure exactly how to really keep them coming on Monday and Wednesday. I heard, you know, it'd be interesting to hear other people's thoughts. There was an NPR story earlier this semester on a university in Arizona that had set up some sort of electronic system so that they could detect students coming in. I don't know, you know, what to think about that, but I mean, obviously, again, trying to make the Monday and Wednesday seem as interesting as possible, and emphasizing that for the exams that the stuff I'm actually saying in class on Monday, Wednesday is crucial. But again, I don't have it all figured out as far as those big lectures.
I've got a specific question with that. Do any of you have something or a strategy for just getting the class started when you've got a large class like that and they're not really paying attention, to get just a starter to get their attention? And or maybe what do you do? Because you may not think it's that great, but for other people it might be good.
I clear my throat.
Okay?
And it usually works. I'm surprised. Well, usually sometimes I'm playing music, kind of as they're coming in. Mm-hmm. That stops. I put on the lapel mic, and then we really, I kind of really begin where we left off. And usually I'm pressing pause at the end of the last class session and having a review of where we were the first 5 minutes, and then moving from there, and trying to see if there are any questions. Because I always come to class with an agenda, and I always have to remind myself, well, many students come with an agenda as well. Mm-hmm. To kind of figure out are we on the same page as we move forward for the next hour in the process.
Any other ideas for getting started?
All right, well, what I've done on occasion is I'll basically show a clip from YouTube. And it's not always directly related to what I'm going to talk about, but it might be just something that's interesting in chemistry. And that's kind of a good way to get started, because when the clip is over, you have everybody's attention. They're waiting now for you to start class.
Sometimes I will play some music as well, and then usually with the same thing, getting prepped, having everything ready to go, I'll just simply say good afternoon. If it's a Monday, I'll recognize the weekend, hope you had a great weekend, that kind of thing, talking about that. And if it was a football game, I might mention that. And then if it's something going on really pressing in the news, something really significant, I might say, let's take a real-time 5 or something like that and talk about this issue, which we did a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, well, I can explain that a little bit later, but anything that's going on right now that I think they're really looking closely at, we try to address that at the beginning, and then we start. And then I also give them an overview of what we're going to do that day, any kind of housekeeping issues, we review those as well.
I kind of like the spot down at the end. I get to hear everybody's good thoughts and then feed on them. No, I agree with Kim. I mean, a lot of the time I'm just kind of boring. I basically sort of reiterate what we've been up to, where we are in the grand scheme of things, why we're talking about what we're doing that particular day, and then just kind of give an overview of maybe the main points for that day. But I do think it's helpful, especially, say, with the food course. Often there's interesting stuff that's been in the paper, and so then that is a really nice move, I think, to be able to say, see, what we're talking about, again, is relevant to you. It's not completely, abstract. You can actually see how this kind of thing has been going on in the news. So.
Anyone else have questions?
Sure, yeah. So I had just a general question. It kind of relates to this space that we've been in, but it seems to me for students to be thoughtfully engaged, they need to be prepared. They need to come to class prepared. And so my area, we do a lot of discussion-based teaching, and so in order for them to, for everybody to be engaged, everybody kind of needs to come prepared. And so I was just curious if you had any thoughts on techniques or things that you do to encourage or to enforce or student preparation, but just any thoughts that you have.
Getting students prepared.
I'll just acknowledge right offhand, I don't think that's one of my greatest, gifts and strengths. So I'm curious to hear what my fellow panelists have to say, actually.
The audience is free.
When I first started teaching, I was infamous on campus for the pop quiz. And I used it pretty regularly. And for some reason, I gave it up. I mean, it did sort of compel, I want to say force, students to become prepared. But then I started using very short in-class writing assignments, really based upon the assigned readings and assigned primary sources. And I rarely sort of challenged a student who did not demonstrate a preparedness or haven't engaged, but I knew, and I certainly kept note of that. And that usually was a pretty clear indication who was up to speed on the material. And so sometimes it was a kind of journal assignment, sometimes there was a short in-class paragraph assigned. But that was one of my kind of gauges, kind of getting a sense of where people were in the class.
A lot of the reaction papers that I assign typically are based on the readings. I have them, read when they have a paper to write. Want to make sure that they're referring to the readings and also their own personal experience and incorporating those two, linking those two. Sometimes, in all honesty, what I do, because, again, some students, you wonder if they ever have the books, if they got the books, just all kinds of things. Most students come to class with the books. Sometimes others are waiting, different kinds of scenarios. But I will use the Elmo sometimes. So if there's something I really want to highlight, I'll put the book up there. I mean, I'll open the page and I say, let's look at this paragraph. Let's look at this page, and then we can discuss. And I recognize this for some students, that's the first time they're seeing that. For some of them, And so, but here's a chance for them to really engage in that moment. And other times, I might just make copies of maybe front and back and say, let's look at this and let's discuss this right now. And but it is a challenge. A lot of students I find are engaged in the material, but there are others who just not, prepared that day. But they will have to be when they write the papers, so it's a little bit of a delayed preparation. Perhaps, I don't know, you never know.
So in the chemistry courses, I mean, these are kind of classes that you absolutely have to stay on top of the material, because if you let it go just for an instant, you're going to be completely lost. And frankly, what I found the best way to do this is just to have the regular weekly assignments. So they have homework assignments that they have to do every week, and they can, basically get as much help as they want to on those homework assignments. The homework grades should be really, really good. So it's not so much that we want to have them go out and solve original problems, but they just need to keep on top of, working to solve problems. I found that that if you were to get rid of homework, then nobody would do any work until the exam, and it would be quite terrible. So in my particular case, the homework is just absolutely crucial to staying on top of things.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. I'll repeat the question.
What made you give up the pop quiz? I love pop quiz.
So the question was, what made you give up the pop quiz?
It was more work on me, frankly. I was doing it pretty regularly, and it was almost seemed like I was this enforcement thing, and I was sort of trying to shy away from that and really placing ownership of learning on students, and sort of recognizing that those students who I motivate in other ways would indeed do the readings, would indeed be prepared, and there was probably little, this is the other confession, that I could do. Because there were some students who failed miserably regularly on the pop quiz, and there was only slight improvement amongst some others. And so I think, again, I thought I got more out of the short reflection papers than the kind of multiple choice pop quizzes that I was assigning early on in my teaching.
I thought what you meant was a pop quiz in class, just asking someone like you did.
Oh, no, I meant actually a written test. Right. No, but you mean sort of the old law school technique of sort of, yeah, oh, I do that too.
Is that a really good way to?
No, that is. And it's quite embarrassing too. And I am mindful of this in these large classes, that is often sometimes not the best strategy to kind of, because it is embarrassing. You sort of call on X sitting in the front seat, X does not know, and there's, of course, it's quite funny in these large classes, and I think students are then marked, and I'm very careful about that as well.
Yes.
Just occurred to me, in a setting like this, often the prototypical student I have in mind as we discuss these things is like the undergraduate, right? Because I don't want to be stereotypical, but often they seem to present some of the greatest challenges. I'm just curious, in a distinguished panel like this, if you might have some specific suggestions for teaching graduate students, both in and out of the classroom, I mean, in the broad sense of helping graduate students make it, and going through. All my experience in the past has been with teaching undergrads, and so one day when I'm teaching grad students, I'm just curious as to what's special. I mean, it could be special challenges or just insight that is particularly applicable there.
Okay, since I've done both, I guess I can comment on this. For the graduate students, I mean, really in all the classes that I teach, I like to focus on problem solving. And we, of course, do it in different levels, in general chemistry, and in sort of junior, senior physical chemistry, and in the graduate program. So with the graduate students, I like to give them a problem that is, that draws on the concepts that we've taught in class, but is quite different in its approach. So it's more sort of a thought problem. And the idea is that they're going to get together and discuss it. They'll come to me and have discussions. And I think that for me, those kinds of homework assignments or problems have worked a lot better than taking exams. Because I feel like in a graduate class, the problems become so complicated you can't really test them in any kind of depth on the exams. But if you have sort of these extended homework problems that they can think a lot about, go to the literature and see what's there, I feel like that's a really good way for them to learn.
I've had graduate students in some of my courses that were 500 level, and I've also taught some grad seminars. And, I find the grad students engage the material much differently. I mean, they're prepared. I mean, for the day. They've done the reading. And so what we try to do, obviously, in that situation is discuss, and I want to hear more about what they think, and have them work through or think about a research paper at the very end of the semester. But also, I like to create like a panel type of group presentation at the end to get them thinking about giving papers at meetings and things like that. So that's one of the goals that I really work on throughout that semester. And so we encourage a lot of the students, as we all do, to give papers and things like that. So I really try to, work on that throughout the semester so they become more comfortable, with their ideas and contextualizing ideas and moving forward in that way.
When I actually wrote my statement for consideration for the Mungo, I began telling a story about a young woman who took my first course I ever taught here in the spring of 1999, who is soon to get her PhD from here next year. So it's kind of a wonderful bookend to sort of watch this process and feeds into your question, because it's a very different type of relationship now. She was an undergraduate student who I was sort of teaching really the basics of the field. And now it's increasingly about professionalization. It's about how to be a historian, a professional historian who wants to go into a teaching and research career. It's about how to present papers. It's about how to begin the publication stages. So it's a very different type of relationship, and I think much more about kind of intellectual engagement as it is about professionalization in the field.
Just following up the point on professionalization, I think that something that both I recognized coming out of grad school that I wished I had more of and that I try to do now is just giving the student as much of a sense professionally of the field as possible. What are the major journals that they'd be wanting to look at, that they'd be wanting to consider publishing in? Sort of, again, strategies for publication. What does a good publication look like in this area? How to develop it? And even in the classes, just sort of the big picture sense of what are the major streams of thought in this area? What are the major topics? Kind of where is it headed? Just getting situated professionally as to sort of what's going on and what the networks are, good people, things like that.
We've talked a lot about in-class behavior and lecturing, and I think some great ideas, but I'd like you just to address out of class. Do you use any type of technology? Obviously we have Blackboard accessible, using the discussion board or different things like that that you might help or that you might find helpful for your students, especially from small to large classrooms.
So the question is, how do you communicate with your students outside of the class?
Or how you use technology outside.
Or use technology outside of the class in your teaching? Or not?
Actually, I have to admit, I don't probably do that much with technology, but I do have an extensive Blackboard website. So a student who wasn't able to come to class can absolutely download all the materials. All the assignments are there. All the due dates are pretty clear. And we have online homework as well. So students, of course, spend a lot of their time outside of class working on those homework problems.
I use a lot of, I use Blackboard in quite the same way, and I will sometimes send email messages to students saying, watch this video or watch this video clip, this is something interesting we discussed in class, I thought about this. So I'll send them periodic emails as well as using Blackboard and having discussion groups and things like that. I've thought about, but I haven't used, but I've thought about using Facebook as a way to have discussions outside of class, because that way everyone could post and we could see the postings and those kinds of things. I've thought about it, haven't done it yet, given it some thought.
This is really more of a challenge for me than my students. I've used Blackboard for documents, for email correspondence, and one time I tried to use Blackboard for office hours using the chat feature, and students really enjoyed that. I found it quite boring. And I've not done it, I used it one semester, and I just thought, I'm not being very effective here. I'm responding to the questions, but I can't see you. I don't know your reaction. So that is a technique or a tool that certainly is available, and I think has certain merits. Probably is quite pretty enriching for the students, but for me, who really feeds on the interactive contact, I found it less satisfying.
I don't think I'm very technologically exciting with my classes. I mean, I use Blackboard as well, and just a little reference to the library. I mean, they do a really nice job putting up e-reserve, documents and things, so that works out very well. And I do encourage the students, of course, to be communicating with me by email. I mean, that's just another way to show that I am available, and I try to respond very efficiently so they recognize, hey, this is a good way to communicate, but nothing super exciting.
Could I offer a comment just to your question on technology? Last year, I started using Twitter for the first time with my students, and I had set it up initially to connect my students with students in France. That didn't work because the students in France didn't buy into it, but my students in my class connected with each other and connected with me in ways like I've never seen before. And I found it very, very interesting that the community that was built between my students and between myself was very intimate, and intimate in a good sense, because the students, they were able to find out things about each other. They were able to find out things about me that I think they probably wouldn't have in class. Sorry, I have a cold. But I found it to be very interesting. But I also have a question too for the panel. I teach generally a smaller class because I teach in languages. Sorry, I'm trying to fight this cold. But one thing that I struggle with is I generally have one student. I try to engage everyone in the class, but I usually have one student that I just can't seem to connect with for some reason. And I don't know if you all have ideas as to how to deal with the one student that you just can't seem to engage or motivate or connect with in a class.
That's a great question.
I mean, that is a really tough question. I mean, when it is a smaller class, I don't know if there are opportunities, say, after class in terms of, sort of, sometimes I find if there's a student, say they've done a presentation, and I have the opportunity to, say, talk to them a little bit after class about it or something like that, to sort of break the ice, to actually develop that personal connection, that sometimes then it kind of softens things up and they recognize, oh, maybe this guy isn't so bad after all, and get interested. So again, that's just one thought, but I know it is, I struggle with that myself.
I think, again, this invites some real talent, because it's in some ways quite hypocritical for me to say what I've said the last few minutes about being engaged, reflective, critical, in particularly small classes. Because when I was undergraduate, that was the last thing I wanted to do, to actually have a conversation with a professor in a small. And yet, here I am underscoring that as an important educational skill and asset. And I think one of the real challenges for all of us is to kind of measure or kind of investigate why. I mean, what is it about this one student that they are either reluctant, they're not prepared, or what is it that kind of keeps that student from being engaged? Or what is it about the dynamics of the small seminar that silences this student? And can anything be done to reshape the dynamics that makes that student more comfortable? I actually thought you were going to ask another question. And the question was, what do you do about that one student who is so well prepared, so engaged, so talkative in seminars that almost shuts everyone else down? And I've had that on many occasions, where there's this one student who's kind of my buddy, that is clearly reading my notes, and we're on the same page, and this student and I are having dialogues on a regular basis. Then I must check myself and really push this, sort of usually pull the student to the side. I said, I know you know your stuff. Let others have a chance. Let others be engaged. Why don't you sort of watch this play out for a while? And generally, when the one student or the two or three students who are generally the most active, most talkative, are less so, that pulls others in that smaller class into action or become more engaged in the process of discussion and debate.
Something I've tried to do in those situations, and I've had experience with that too. But let me just back up to say, before I went to graduate school, I was in student affairs. I was a hall director. I was an admission counselor. Then I went to direct a study abroad program. So I worked with students in different contexts, where I had to really kind of ask them personal kinds of questions, and have kind of advising moments, so to speak, with them. But I've had to ask students, is everything okay? Just simply that, after class, kind of in a private way, how are things, is everything all right? I noticed this, And so that opens it up. And sometimes it's just, it might be the student has a work schedule, has some family issue, has something going on that's very personal that's keeping them from participating in that way. So sometimes I just have to just, ask that question. Other times, when I think it's just something where the student may not feel comfortable participating, I'll create like that small group discussion. And so that, and walk around. And that way I know, I'm fairly certain, everyone's participating in that way because it goes around. We all know how that works. So sometimes it's just that, having to just, and it's uncomfortable, to do that sometimes, but just to ask that question.
So in my classes, a student who is silent is not necessarily a bad thing, right? They could actually be totally on top of things. They know their material. They're taking care of themselves. But if you feel like there is a student who's maybe not participating enough, it's generally a good idea to stop and talk to them and find out exactly what their circumstances are. And in some cases, I find that they don't interact well in a big group. They'll never ask a question in class, but they have their own study groups that they're extremely interactive with, and that works really well for them. There have been other times that basically a student won't say a thing in class, but they're a terrific student, and I'll basically offer them an opportunity. Oh, do you want to go to the board and solve a problem and explain it to the class? And if they can do this ahead of time and they're prepared, they love to do it, and they do a great job.
What else? Yes.
I'd like to ask a question about making just a couple of assumptions. And I'm assuming that you don't have 100% success in every class all the time.
Of course.
And I'm assuming that this doesn't send you over the cliff in despair. So my question is, how do you maintain confidence in your own skills and abilities and yet remain concerned and not dismissive? If they didn't get it, it's not my fault. And yet not become overwhelmingly frustrated with the fact that there's lots of students who don't seem to succeed.
Janet, that's a great question because sometimes I think I take this stuff too seriously, and that the success of a student rises and falls on my ability to be a great teacher. And there are days when I know I've fallen flat in my preparation, in my delivery, and kind of walk away kind of feeling miserable about that. Or days when I think I've been extraordinarily successful, and I get the test scores back, or I read these papers like, what the hell? I thought we were all moving in the same direction. And all of a sudden, there's clearly kind of this red flag that rises. And I think you're right to recognize that, we'll have a lot of wins in what we do as instructors and professors. And there will be some losses. And there's sometimes very little we could do about that. And I said earlier about recognizing students come to the class, to the table with multiple interests, backgrounds, and actually multiple objectives. There are some who are here just to get by. And they can have the best teachers around them, and they will still want to just get by. But then there are those who are just sort of sometimes indifferent, kind of halfway there, and those are the ones I enjoy the most. Trying to convert those students or lead those students toward a different path. And oftentimes that's how I measure my success. I'll always have great students. And I'll always have students who are kind of just to get by. But then there are those in the middle who I think really, for me, is to kind of see the real rewards from that process and that interaction is really what's most fulfilling. And to see a student who was indifferent 5 years from now, send me an email and saying, hey, I don't think you recognize this. I don't think you fully understood this assignment. But let me tell you now what that means to me. And that is really what's really quite rewarding about the business that we do as instructors.
That is a really interesting question. I remember it was striking to me. I think the first class that I taught myself as a graduate student, looking out and realizing some of these students really look bored. Like they're not excited to be here, and the depression of that. And I think maybe a little bit like what Bobby was saying. I think that a lot of it for me is even if there are days when I come away from a class thinking that just really didn't go very well, the other days where you feel so exhilarated, like wow, something great happened, or meeting with students and them just really seeming grateful, like they actually got it, and figured something out. So I think if I sort of continually just had the sort of feelings of, man, this didn't go very well, I think it really would be hard. I mean, so it's a kind of simple answer, but I feel like it's the back and forth between the interspersed with the students giving positive feedback. We're all, thinking about being good teachers, but, it's so encouraging, the fact that you do have students that'll say, that was really neat, or, I really appreciated that, or whatever. I think that's, that positive feedback's really important to me.
I'd like to just tell you a little anecdote. It's one of our graduate students who was teaching, she was responsible for teaching some of these intro logic classes. And at the end of this, she was a fanatic about learning all the students' names. And I visited her class one day, and she begins the class by going around and saying, hello, name each person, and saying something of them, how about the X? And one of her students at the end of the semester wrote the evaluation saying that she was the first person in his whole career, he was a senior at USC, who knew his name, and let alone knew his name, also knew that he liked to fix cars. So she knew something about him, and it was that simple thing. All you had to know was the person's name and something about his interests, and he thought this was a great class. So in some ways, there's very little you have to do to get these students to be engaged and interested. Just something, a little personal touch like that made all the difference.
If I might, I just wanted to follow up on that comment, because I completely agree with what you say, and I always make it a point in my classes, including the big ones, the first thing that I have them do is basically fill out a sheet about themselves. So they say who they are, they say what their career goals are, and they say something interesting about themselves. And I can basically go and look at that, and when I finally get a chance to meet them out of the 250 students, I try to make that connection, and it really gives it a much more personal flavor, and I think students do appreciate that.
I engage in this other exercise. I'm actually really bad with names, but I can tell you everything else about you but your name. I can tell you where you're from. I can tell you the industry in that small South Carolina town, where you're from. I usually know what their major is, but somehow I can't get the name right. But usually once they say the name, I can run down the list. And usually there's an index card that goes around. Now it's an online tool I use that asks for a name, interest, the last book you read, sometimes depending on the semester. And I also want to know the major, because I think one of the important points to make today is that many of us teach students who are not in our field. I mean, they're there for other reasons. They're non-majors. And to kind of understand the kind of intellectual and academic interests of students from other fields, I think, too, is quite important. And again, I think many students are surprised that there is this interest in themselves as persons, as individuals. And I think the more they're recognized and appreciated as individuals, I think the better the relationship is in the classroom.
So is there anything any of you do specifically to help make connections between disciplines and their disciplines and what you're doing?
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just thinking about that when Bobby made his point. Again, I think one advantage of knowing about the students' majors, say one course that I teach a good bit is environmental ethics, and so there I'll have kind of a mixture of different students, some engineers, some folks interested in economics or this or that, and it's also a course where we do connect up with different disciplines, and so I find it sometimes helpful to say, look, given this problem, we really need you engineers out there to be thinking about this, work on some technology for us, or to note, to the folks working in economics. Now, this is a point where, the ethicists and the economists may be in a little bit of tension here, and, it'd be interesting to see what, your professors over in the business school would say about this. Or in philosophy, often, it's worth sort of helping the students recognize, now this is kind of a conceptual sort of issue, but it would be very interesting to get some empirical information on this to kind of recognize. So I just think it's, again, a helpful point to know where the students are coming from to kind of help, draw connections to what might be going on in their discipline, or how their discipline could really be helpful to what we're addressing. So just
Along those same lines, I have teaching a course this semester that's cross-listed, and I encounter that just in that course. It's a Black feminist theory, and so is anthropology, women's and gender studies, and African American studies. And so the students coming from these different areas, and then there are other students in there too, history, political science, et cetera. So a lot of them have different understandings of the topic. So I spent, I think, 1 week, and we chose one topic, and I said, okay, how would you all look at the same issue within women's and gender studies? What is your perspective over here? And so for African American studies, I mean, we looked at traditional gender roles, and so within women's and gender studies, some of them were used to doing a feminist critique, and then anthropology, well, those students were like, well, we're used to seeing things cross-culturally, so let's look at it that way. So then once we all heard each other, then we said, okay, now let's back up. And the course is this, and let's move on. But it was a challenge at first because they weren't hearing each other because they're coming from different places. So I had to slow down and back up and then proceed that way. And it worked out. It was pretty effective. I did co-teach a course in anthropology last semester on connections, and it was a grad course, and so we reminded ourselves of that. So how would a historian approach this topic? What do you bring to the table? So we went around the room that way and recognizing everybody has a different kind of tradition and a way of looking at things, and that was really, a great way to move throughout the semester, just remind ourselves we have different disciplinary kinds of approaches. So.
I think the whole interdisciplinary model is important, not only from our kind of academic disciplines, but also from our other roles as instructors, as faculty members, as advisors, and as mentors on campus, because I think it's important for us to really be kind of fully know the kind of landscape of levels of inquiry on campus, across campus, and to kind of know the areas of research and scholarship and other areas to really push our students in those directions. Once we kind of know their own kind of professional or intellectual ideas or agenda, to kind of push them in other areas that they normally would not pursue. And it really is the instructor, the faculty member, the advisor, the mentor who guides students in those other directions. So I think as we try to create well-rounded students on this campus, I think it is our job as faculty members to really know other areas, not in depth, but certainly aware of what opportunities are available for our students in other fields.
How do you combat, I guess you could say, learned helplessness, where you have the student that's asking the question that is in the reading and that you've gone over every single day in class, and it's obvious that they, haven't done the reading or haven't put forth the thought, and instead of, just reiterating your point, like politely want to say, read. Or if you send an email and you say, please, go to the lab at 5 o'clock, and then you get the email, what time do we have to go to the lab? And you don't want to say, read the email. You want to politely address that without having them, get into that habit.
Okay, what's your name? Alex, I'm going to use your phrase now. From this point on, learned helplessness was a term she coined today, because I think that's an apt way to describe some things I sense, and it's so incredibly frustrating. Because my first response is not to read. My first question is, well, why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you exhausting time, energy, and money if you're not serious? And so I sort of approach it on that flat level, to get a sense of what is the obstacle here? Why are you making so many detours? Why are you not taking full advantage of an incredible opportunity on a college or university campus? And when I pose that question, oftentimes there's a moment of intense reflection among students. Because if they're not able to answer that question in a satisfactory way, they begin to sort of question themselves. And usually, you're not going to get 100% success, as Professor Hudson just acknowledged, but you do have an awakening among some students that you are fully mindful that they're not serious. And again, I think students are oftentimes put off or surprised that a professor actually cares that they're doing well. I'm actually amazed now. In addition to being a professor of history, I'm also the faculty principal of Preston College on campus. So that means I live with 235 undergraduates on this campus from all kinds of majors and fields. And I see already the real challenge we have on campus of motivating students, many of whom believe that just having a college degree is sufficient. And my job is to say it is about lifelong learning, and that's not a catchphrase. we should be serious about that. And it's about a life of the mind. And that our job is to give you the skills and the tool sets to be successful on this campus. And sometimes I ask the question, if you're not serious, then why should I? I believe that the student-faculty relationship is a dialogue. It is a kind of symbiotic relationship. And there are some students I just write off, frankly. If I get a sense that the one of the 40 is in some ways not on board and there is little I can do about it, then there are 39 others that I focus my attention on. But thank you for that phrase.
It is in psychology, so I can't take credit for it completely.
Any other ideas about dealing with I don't know, I'm going to say the stupid question.
I have one more thing I want to say, maybe that. The other thing is to be mindful of is that we as individual faculty are not in this teaching thing alone. And to recognize there are multiple ways of assistance on this campus that we should, and I think as now working in Preston, there are things I should have known teaching over in Gambrell that I just did not know. I mean, I guess I knew about the Student Success Center, I knew about ACE, I knew about the writing workshop, but taking full advantage of these assets on campus, I think if that happens, and if more faculty are fully mindful of all the other modes of assistance on campus that are available, I think we'll have a stronger student body, frankly. I'm amazed at times the real gulf between student affairs and the academic faculty. And I think one of the real challenges on our campus is to really narrow that gulf for the sake of our students, really.
Actually, if I could make a comment about this, sort of the chemistry equivalent of, they ask you how to solve a problem which is identical to one that maybe we've done 5 times in class and did for homework as well. And really, they come to you and they just want you to give them the equation. They want you to give them the equation and they want you to show them what all the variables are and how to plug the numbers in, right? And then they'll take it from their calculator, right? But I refuse to do that. Basically, I won't tell them what the equation is. I say, well, what is this concept? What is this concept about? Where did we talk about it in the notes? Where was it that we discussed this? What do these variables mean? So I won't actually give them the answer, but I'll force them to go back to their notes or go back to the book and look for the answer themselves. And I'm happy to sort of guide them along, but I'm certainly just not going to give them the answer flat out.
Another thing is that there are some students who have a kind of helplessness. And then there are some others where there's a flag that we all should be mindful of. That there are some very serious reasons why some of our students are not getting it. And sometimes they're not even mindful of it. And we are the first to kind of register there is perhaps a disability, there is some other reason that is inhibiting this student from being successful. And again, being aware of what are the other levels of assistance on campus that really give students a more structured kind of approach to learning I think is again something all professors should be mindful of.
How do you challenge your students' thoughts in such a way that you don't scare them into wanting to be silent in the future? Because I found that when I press a student on their ideas, just to get them to clarify, not because I think they're wrong, they tend to say, oh, you're right, I was wrong, and then forget about it, which is not my goal at all. How do you handle that in your classes?
Good question from a philosopher, because philosophers like to challenge ideas, and so I mean I think that there is an element of I don't know, finesse in, and not that I have it all figured out, but in sort of affirming the student, encouraging them that, hey, this is a good idea, worth pursuing, but now somebody, I might say, now somebody might, raise this particular worry about it, but I think that you could probably respond. Do you have ideas for how you might address that sort of worry? Or again, I think this kind of appropriate kind of affirmation, providing adequate, because the students, I think, aren't prepared for the kind of harsh response that, again, a philosopher might offer in a conference or something like that. So offering the adequate encouragement that, hey, you're on the right track, or, keep, pursuing this, but as well as, so that delicate balance between the encouragement and the criticism, again, kind of a basic point, but.
I think Kevin is right about the word finesse, because when I first started teaching, my first tool was to kind of hit the buzzer wrong. And in fact, that is the wrong way, I think, to address students. But it is, I think, to be constructive, to be affirming, and to be positive in ways, even when you know a student is completely off track, is making it up in the response. But how do you kind of push that student in ways that, does offer a learning moment? Even though that answer to the question was wrong or inappropriate. Because I think, again, it is about the climate you create in the classroom. And I think the point you raised is right. That there are some students where if that is the first response to a wrong answer, then that sets the tone for the rest of the semester. And I think you really want to be mindful of the tone, the kind of culture you create, the environment you create in a classroom that is not completely kind of dismissive of students who are on the wrong page of the assignment.
To me, it seems that if the atmosphere in my class is good, then I can say, wrong, as long as you do it often enough. Right. I don't think there's a rule that says you can't say someone's wrong. Right. I mean, yes, you can say someone's wrong, just as long as you don't make it violent, or, as long as you don't make it confrontational. That's the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, too, that what I do use in the beginning of the semester is let students know, especially if it's one of the smaller classes where we're discussing some of the sensitive topics, it's about race, ethnicity, gender, different things, class, et cetera. I'll say, I want to create a safe environment here where everybody is valued and where everyone's contributions are valuable, and you feel safe in expressing what you want to express. And so if somebody says something, I might ask the student to explain a little bit more, and I may ask, does anyone else have a comment, something a little bit different? Are there other, views? And usually some of the students will ask me eventually what I want to say, what do I think, what I feel, that kind of thing. But I try to use that as a moment, as Bobby was saying too, for them to discuss, for them to have a discussion around that same issue that the one student brought up.
Yeah, because I want to avoid, I think you are right. I mean, there are some ways you should indicate very clearly you have a wrong, that's not the correct response. And the best scenario is when I pull back as the enforcer and allow another member of the class to challenge the response or to offer a corrective kind of spin on the response. And I think that if that chemistry is there, that's a great class session, I think.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So I'm a graduate student, and we lead discussion sections for the history department. And sometimes, so we typically have 3 discussion sections, and oftentimes I feel like 2 of them go really well, and I do the exact same thing in the 3rd one, and I'm missing this chemistry. And I just sit there, and I have no idea how to do something different to get this group of people to discuss in similar ways as my other classes have. And I was just wondering if you had any suggestions to how to fire up that one class that just seems to be dead.
I'm just curious, is it the Friday class? Is it?
Well, actually, my Friday 8 a.m. class this semester is good. In the past, it hasn't been. This time, it's the Wednesday afternoon one.
Wow. No, one of my TAs is experiencing that same issue right now, same thing. And I mean, I think there was like a boyfriend-girlfriend scenario. They wanted to sit by each other and wanted to talk. And, this other group that just wanted to socialize. And so, we were thinking through that and trying to, she wanted to ask students to change seats, so we're working through that right now. So I think That's tough. I mean, that is really tough. I mean, I guess what I would say is if you can create something in class that would get everybody, some kind of, I don't know if it's an icebreaker, something to kind of get them comfortable with each other, you know, to kind of change the dynamics a little bit in the classroom. Something that would involve maybe discussion, something, I don't know, just to change it up a little bit and then kind of reconfigure. I don't know, it's a difficult thing. That's a difficult thing. But it might, I think it does require something that involves everyone engaged in something. If it's discussing something, trying something a little bit different maybe. I wouldn't suggest changing seats, you know, anything like that. So we're not gonna be doing that. But we are trying some other kinds of things like that so that students can engage, you know, a little bit differently. It's tough.
Again, I find it really interesting. It'd be fun to, you know, there probably is some good psychological research on, you know, how this ends up playing out. You know, I'm always intrigued by that sort of thing. But I think sometimes acknowledging, like if I find early in the semester, sort of noting, you know, you folks are kind of a tough crowd here, you know, it's sort of hard getting things going, and then maybe specifying, hey, I want to come back next week, and I want you to really focus on this particular point, and I'm going to, you know, go ahead and ask you about this, and so I want you to have something intelligent to say. You know, it doesn't always solve the problem, but sometimes just sort of acknowledging that I really want them to be, you know, on target here, and, you know, maybe that can open things up after that. But yeah, it's tough.
It does raise the larger question you're offering, but there are some times in our classes where we need to undergo kind of a diagnostic. Check the belts, kind of check the oil, make sure everything's functioning. And sometimes, I think Kevin's right, maybe you need a new driver. And maybe you need a new kind of a way to kind of frame the class debate. Oftentimes, there are occasions where actually I task students with crafting the agenda for the day, or I task an individual to teach. Usually, sometimes, some of my most difficult students in my larger classes, guess what? They end up teaching. And all of a sudden, the spotlight is off of Donelson and on someone else. And I've had mixed results with that, but it's enjoyable to watch it happen. And to see that play out, because again, there's a different kind of ownership of the course, and I think Kevin is right to perhaps completely reorient the class and give them the task not only to come back knowing the history, but ways of framing discussion and debate in the classroom.
So do you have any advice for how to be efficient in your preparations of a great class?
Yes, I was ready for this question because I am so guilty of kind of not being efficient. I think one of the things for all of us is to recognize the limitations of classes and the limitations of a classroom. And I am guilty of trying to immerse my students in everything I think they should know for a session, a topic, a field of study. And I think we have to pull back from a pedagogical perspective and figure out what must they know, what is crucial for them to know, as opposed to kind of what should they know. And I think this is actually why I think this debate we're having across the nation about learning outcomes, those two bad words for some professors, are so crucial, because I think we should be mindful of what are the takeaways of these classes or of this session, of this lecture. And if we kind of have a sense of the framework of the takeaways, then we tailor our lectures, we tailor our classes in that way. I am always guilty of over-preparing, kind of having 35 PowerPoint slides when I can only get through 10. I should know this by now, and yet I come to class regularly with 35 slides. And I think, again, it's a moment to kind of pull back and to give thought about what are we teaching and why are we teaching it. And I think we should always kind of have that moment of self-reflection about not simply the content, but also about the approach to how we teach.
I completely agree with Bobby here. When I teach, I always like to have a theme. There's basically 1 or 2 points that I'm trying to get across in the class, and I really try to focus on those. And I found that that a lot of times more is actually less in the end, because you try to cram too many things, and they've lost then what the true point that you're trying to make is. So I think it's pretty important to streamline sometimes.
I think that's really interesting because I was about to say pretty much the same thing, and I was going to say, now, I'm not sure if this would work in chemistry when you got all this stuff you have to, but I was going to say, I mean, for philosophy, it works really well to sort of think about, okay, what's my main focus for today, you know, and so then the students can come away with, all right, well, at least that was the main point here, and we were thinking about sort of, you know, pros and cons related to this point, or, you know, something like that, or, and even in terms of organizing the thoughts, you know, if it's possible to, and again, it may be a lot easier to do this in chemistry on this point, but creating some sort of central figure or diagram or something to sort of organize the material off of, just in terms of helping students remember and helping me to sort of stay focused in terms of thinking about it, I think is helpful.
Still think about my experience this semester with the Intro to Cultural Anthropology class. You know, in that course, I found out this semester that we have to, any films that we use, when in the past we could show films in sections, but now because sections are all throughout campus, we don't know where students are going to be meeting, you know, in terms of the rooms, we don't know if it's going to be a smart room, we're not sure what equipment's going to be there, if it's going to be an element, we don't know. So we have to watch films in class. I have to have all that in there. So not only, I mean, the slides, the lecture, you know, the films, and some kind of discussion, all of that wrapped in there. So that's a challenge, I think, too, you know, going into the semester. Because, I mean, a film, you know, we're trying to find something within that time period, that time frame. So anyway, my preparation has been a little bit different this semester going into that. I also like to say, too, in my other class, I'm teaching in Curel this semester for the very first time, and I've had some technology challenges in there. So I've been as prepared can be with, you know, my PowerPoint slides, with the YouTube. Yes, I've had in my links and everything just to get there the first week of class, and the computers were taken out of the room, out of Curel. All the towers were taken out of Curel before classes started. They were there before, then all of a sudden they were gone. So I show up with my flash drive and there's no computer. And then for an upgrade, that's what we were told. And we still don't have computers in there now. And so I'd never been in there before teaching. So long story short, I brought my MacBook. The next day, it didn't connect with the projector. So, I mean, this is like, so I'm borrowing a student's laptop every day, you know. She's there to take notes, I'm borrowing her computer. So, I mean, those kinds of things. So we have to adapt, we adjust, we do all those things. So, you know, and the student, I was honest, you know, saying, hey, I'm kind of high tech, you know, but we're working with it here, we're working with it. I was just honest with them. So in those cases, I had to post things, you know, send out as many emails, watch this link, do that, until we were up and running with the technology. So the communication. And that part of the course was key, and being honest about what was going on. But anyway, be prepared, but sometimes the technology just doesn't work with us sometimes.
I think along those lines, being able to think on your toes is incredibly important. Anecdotally, I was in a room that the projector died. Or it wasn't the projector, it was the connection between the computer or my laptop and the projector. And it would not do anything, but the scanner flatbed worked. So I took my laptop and I shoved it under the projector and I just kept going. So I think that it's thank you. At the moment I was like, ding, and it all worked. But I think that being able to think on your toes and just not say, oh, looks like we'll have to cancel class because I can't make this work. I think that's very important.
I've got one final question that I'd like each of you to try to answer briefly before we have some punch and cookies that arrived while we were all talking. And the question is, you have, let's say you have a new faculty member in your department. What advice would you give them about teaching here at the University of South Carolina? If you've only got 2 minutes to talk to them, because they've got to go do their research.
I think one thing I'd say to the faculty member is that, you know, while you've got a range of students here, you know, this is a pretty bright bunch. And so, you know, I think that you can have confidence in your students. And if something doesn't seem to be going well, say, you know, in, you know, a pretty boring, you know, logic class or something like that, if they don't seem to be getting it or engaged, that it's worth, you know, while the students may, you know, be having some problems, that it's worth thinking back upon oneself and seeing, you know, is there a way in which I could present this in a way that would engage them a little better? Is there a way in which I can sort of better sort of relate to the students that, it's not like these are, people who, just have no, capabilities. Have a positive attitude toward the students and think of them as folks that, well, you might not be able to engage all of them. Have a good positive attitude toward them, and I think that will foster, good things in these classes.
Okay, so one piece of advice that I would have is sort of technical, and that is to be very organized. I found that students really like it when you set out a plan in the beginning and you don't deviate from that plan. So they know exactly where they stand, and they know as the semester goes on, things aren't changing for them. I guess another important lesson that I've learned since I've been here at USC is it's really important to try to make a personal connection with the students. I remember when I was first starting up my research group, I had sort of trouble understanding the concept of that everybody actually has their own personality, and so you have to deal with them as individuals. And once I sort of came to terms with that, then things were so much simpler. And I think the same thing is true for the students. Everybody has their own personality, and if you can find a way to connect with that personality, then that's going to be a terrific class.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with everything that you all have said. I would also say, because I had a similar conversation with someone recently, just to keep the lines open. And so we can go out for lunch, we can talk about things as they develop throughout the semester. And to manage your time, we have to learn how to manage our time. Those emails that we get, so many different emails, the Blackboard time and just the prep and all of that. Just I would simply say to the person that this is new and different, and it's a different way of thinking about our lives and our days and those kinds of things. And so we have to find something that works for us, for large classes, small classes, those kinds of things. So I would also suggest that the new faculty member maybe observe a couple of classes, go in and just see the way the classes are, for small and large sizes and things like that.
I would also encourage new and young faculty to find good mentors. Mm-hmm. I think that's crucial on multiple fronts, and particularly on the fronts in which we're measured for tenure promotion on this campus. I think they should as well keep teaching a point of constant conversation and dialogue, recognizing that we're not always going to get it right. It's never static. It's always evolving, that one should be as passionate and creative in our courses as we can. And I think another important point that should be said to our new faculty is that they should always find imaginative ways to integrate teaching and research, because that is the important and delicate balance we strike as young professors, and is to make sure that we maintain an active research agenda without necessarily making teaching a kind of a second point on our list of things to do, but find really creative ways to marry the two together. I think is very important.
Thank you. I'd like to ask everybody to join me in showing our appreciation for our panelists who gave their time to share some of their ideas with us today. I think that this group of faculty really exemplifies all of the good teaching that occurs here at the University of South Carolina, and I'm proud to be a member of their faculty. Thank you. Have a good evening.